Sarah Jane, Master of Wine, really needs no introduction, I think, to most of us here. For anything Spanish, Sarah Jane is one of the UK experts. She's one of the very limited number of members of the Gran Orden de Caballeros de Vino, and she's actually their chairman at the moment. And this organization recognizes people who make a very significant contribution to the knowledge about Spanish wines in the UK. There are only 82 members, and the association has been going for 36 years. So it does show that it's a very special body. And Sarah's a Master of Wine, and she is a specialist on all things Spanish. So over to you, Sarah Jane, to talk about wines of Navarra.
Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you. And it's terrifically good there's so many of you here, because actually, for those of you who are in London, the sun is shining, and I can see that Liz is in, summer outfit. It's just wonderful weather. Now I see that Charles Metcalf is with us, and maybe the sunshine is shining in Portugal too. We have a very nice range of fellow colleagues from CWW, AWE here today in all different places. So it's good. Now, normally I might ask you to put your comments about the weather in the chat box, but in fact, today we just have the Q&A. So it's a little bit more formal, but if you've got comments, I'm hoping there will be things to say as we go through. Perhaps put them in the Q&A box, and between myself and also Charlotte Hay, who is kindly behind the Dio Navarra label and making sure that all this happens, we should be able to do it. Oh, Charles is still in Sussex. Great Q&A box comment, Charles, and I'm very glad to know that you're recuperating well from operation. And Eva, yes, the sun is shining in Navarra. Well, good time. Now, it's a few years since I've since I've enjoyed Navarra wines like we're doing it today, simply because, partly because sitting in London during COVID, we haven't had the joys of a Navarra campaign, but that's starting now, and this is a very good time to get thinking about Navarra again. I'm sure many of you will have done lovely Navarra trips. I've had some wonderful ones, and there's a few pictures from my memories of Navarra coming up. So you have, those of you who've got the wines, I think it's most of you have got 10 wines. I've actually put them into 10 glasses in the end, but we can have a swapping around as we go. So I'm going to be talking specifically about the sub-regions. Navarra is very straightforward to talk about in that respect. We have wines from 4 out of the 5 sub-regions, so it's a very good range of wines and wine styles. And obviously, the thing that's so interesting for me about Navarra is this question of grape varieties. I'm expecting you to come up with opinions. I'm not expecting us to come up with answers. But my first trip to Navarra must have been in the late 1980s, when I won a prize for my diploma from Freshnet, and it started in Bilbao and it went to Navarra and it moved on across Somontano, very, apparently to me, very new place then, to Catalonia. And in that trip, obviously at that time, the place you went to was the Avena Research Department in Navarra, because it was really something very cutting edge, the kind of research they were doing into varieties and into the appropriate varieties for Navarra. And obviously I met Javier Ochoa there, who was so significant, and we'll have one of his wines coming up. So at that time, it seemed that Navarra, so close to Rioja, and I think that's something we need to think about, is that geography, was learning to understand its own soils, its origins, its traditions. And part of the solution that came out was international varieties. So what's happened since is, I think, 2 things. One, we've had this outburst of garnachistas across Spain who are recuperating wonderful old varieties of the Garnacha, old bush vines which have been abandoned or ignored and underrated, as Grenache has been across the world in many ways. And so we've had that change, the approach to Garnacha. And then secondly, we've had this very strong demand for everything that is local and artisanal, whether it's cheese or whether it's produce or whether it's grapes. So suddenly there's this big debate about whether international varieties should be planted in regions where they didn't start. So it's an unresolved debate, but I think that's a little bit where our tasting goes today, and to see what you have to think about it. So just quickly, this is where we are. The map shows you that Navarra does have an understandably strong French influence from the Pyrenees, just overshadowing them. They're absolutely next door to La Rioja, a very proud kingdom, Navarra. I think it's super important to remember the history of Navarra, and next door to another very proud kingdom here of Aragon. So I could have spent half an hour talking to you about the history. I was very keen to do so, but actually we need to get into the wines. So that's where we are in terms of geography. And what I suggest, we're going to have the recording, is that you should go back to quite a bit of this small print afterwards, because I've got a lot of small print, and I think it's super useful if we're restarting thinking about Navarra, that you should have this data. Probably we can get you the PowerPoints too, but certainly there will be a recording. So it's 100 kilometers from between Pamplona and the Ebro River. And if you think about the Ebro River being that important river that runs through Rioja and bisects it, then it comes in near the bottom of Navarra. It has influences on all sides of climatic ones. We'll come to that on the map. Very close to the Bay of Biscay, but also not so far from the Mediterranean. And it's over 10,000 hectares. And there is a fabulous array of other produce, but they have enormously delicious vegetables of all kinds. But again, the climate change is very different. So we have the 5 distinct wine making areas I mentioned. So I've got several maps of this. This is one I've selected from a Spanish presentation, and it's quite useful in giving you the sense of the mountains. And you can also see the rivers. And right down the bottom, below this white line that runs across, we've got the River Ebro. So that's the very significant river for Rioja. And it also has its very strong influences here. So this is Ribera Baja. And then here we have the much larger Ribera Alta, Tierra Estella, Valdesabe, and Baja Montaña, and Pamplona. Mustn't forget Pamplona. I'm going to come to the bull running, but that's obviously a very significant city there. So that's more or less how that inverted pyramid works in terms of shape. Now, since I'm talking about grapes, we've got a couple of different presentations. This is more a visual presentation of native grapes versus visiting heroes. So yes, Tempranillo, very dominant in the reds. Garnacha also. And then we have Merlot and Cabernet. Now in this chart, which comes from a presentation a couple of years back, Merlot was nudging ahead of Cabernet. In fact, you'll see in the 2020 statistics that come on the next page that is in the other direction. Greciano, we'll let that in as a local. Masuelo too. Syrah and Pinot Noir are ambitious outsiders, but very interesting to see what's happening with those varieties. And then here we have Viura and Moscatel. Navarra's Moscatel, actually we don't have a Navarran Moscatel here, but the sweet Moscatels here are really, really delicious. And we have Garnacha Blanca and Malvasia, but it's true to say that we have a lot of Chardonnay. Clearly producers are very enthusiastic about Chardonnay here. And we've got Sauvignon Blanc, as you would find both of those two in Rioja. So that's how it converts into numbers. Again, this is the one for you to look at later, but you can see that in fact in the 2020 harvest we had 9.2 and Cabernet was actually at 9.7. So actually more or less Cabernet edged ahead, but Masuelo isn't making great figures now. On the white side, it's interesting to see there is really a lot of Moscatel there. In many places, people say Moscatel is a really hard sell. I love good Moscatels, but the Navarra is one of those places where they make it really well. However, comparing the two sets of numbers, there's plenty more red and white. And this, if you look at this slide, you can see on the right-hand side that reds makes around 63%, a bit more than 60%. Whites are around 13%. And Rosado, which is obviously an important part of our story and Navarra's story and our views of where Navarra's going, is almost a quarter. So these are the production figures. The key thing about rosé, which is spelled out here in this text on yields, is that it's made exclusively by the sangrado method, so by the bleeding method. And 1 in 3 of all rosés sold in Spain come from Navarra. Navarra rosé is that iconic thing in Spain. And if you start a conversation, or if you used to start a conversation about rosé, I think it's still the case. If I start a conversation about Rosado in Spain, Navarra has to be there in whatever I then go on to talk about. It was the kind of gold standard. So more than 70% of the vineyards are dedicated to the native varieties, the ones that I've been mentioning, and then we have about 30% of the others. So just a quick reminder of the maps, because now I'm going into the wines. You've been waiting 10 minutes for the wines, and I'm also going to the subzones. So to remind you again, Tierra Estella is very westerly and has an Atlantic influence coming from the Bay of Biscay. In the middle here, the red one, Valdezabe, is a little bit in between, but closer to the mountains. Baja Montaña, as perhaps its name suggests, is much more close to the Pyrenees. But as we come around here, there is a definite Mediterranean influence. And if you think about it, that actually Rioja Oriental is about here. And they chose the word, when they changed the name of the subzone from Rioja Baja to Rioja Oriental, there were those who wanted to change it to Rioja Mediterranea, which also refers to the different climate around this area. And then here we have Ribera Alta, a continental climate, and Ribera Baja just tucked in here. So remembering that, I hope you've got that firmly in mind. We will just have a little moment on Tudela, which is, this is a snap I took when I was going to do a presentation with Jonas Tofterup, MW, at the Denominación de Origen about rosé and about Navarra rosés versus international rosés. And there were some visitors there from Provence. Anyway, this is a shop window, and you can see it's a bakery, and they've got the lovely mantecada pastries, sweetmeats from Tudela, which is one of, I guess I chose this as a reminder of the sheer history of Navarra. It's something, it's not some region that has come out of nothing. It has very deep history. It's also on the trail of Jewish towns. When they had a significant Jewish population, then there is a trail you can take to visit those. And below that is a photograph, because this is a photograph of the shop window. And why it's rather faded is because it's one of mine. And this is San Fermin, the festival, which is also bull running. And the shop has shown a building which celebrates the rites, the traditional rites, the fueros of Navarra. I think it tells you something of the importance and independence of Navarran spirit. And then on this bandstand, some have managed to make it to the top. And then in the front, you have these terrific figures which 3 times life size walk in the streets. With people walk with them in the streets, and some of them terrifying and some of them a little bit more friendly, but it's all part of the event. So it's just a little reminder of everything that's happening in the Navarra region. So first wine, I think you well deserve a wine. We have Castillo and Monjardin Chardonnay, which you can see, you will have had perhaps earlier an email which gives you the data sheets for some of these wines, but not all of them. And I'm just tasting them fresh myself. So we can't have a discussion here about, well, let's contrast two different Chardonnays and see how we feel. But what you can say is, this is a producer, as you look at the label, it says Viñedos de Altura. They want to stress the fact that they're picking their Chardonnay from the best place, which is why they get this freshness. It is deliciously fresh. It's an unoaked style, but interestingly, although it's unoaked, it has a very has quite a fat character to it. It has a warmth, but it finishes then. Well, I don't really need to tell you how it finishes. You'll know because you're tasting it. But it does have a very clean, long finish. And this estate has, let's see, it has, yes, it's a large estate and with some very well established wines. And this one is in Tierra Estella, which is, you may remember, I'll put my hand out, and probably for your sake, I'll put it on that side, but it's on the western side. And while you're still taking some notes on that wine, I mentioned here, I've got a lot of detail, and this is the kind of thing you should go back to. But basically, it is to the western Navarra, and it's along the way of St. James. I'm sure there'll be several of you here who've done the Santiago walk, or indeed I've seen bicycle riders. I mean, you can do it however you wish. But what is very striking about the journey to Santiago is that it's a very significant part of Navarra and part of the lifestyle. There are people doing that journey all the time. There are getting their bookmarks with where they stopped. It's and of course the churches are decorated with the shells. This is a region which is almost half Tempranillo. So although we're talking about Chardonnay, it is a red region, Tempranillo and then Cabernet Sauvignon. But the Chardonnay is dominant with a range of soils. And what I particularly like about these descriptions, which I've got from the denomination, is they actually do talk to you in detail about these soils. It's often very hard in regions of Spain to get this kind of detail about the period of soils and where they are. So thank you to Navarra for that. Many people, and you will have had the same experiences, when you talk to producers in Spain, they want to produce a really good white. So many of them go and the large companies will go and purchase a winery somewhere in Galicia. We're seeing that again and again. Increasingly, there are people in Rioja going to the higher origins, finding higher and higher vineyards to get that freshness, or taking out the Biura that was initially planted in mixed vineyards, traditional mixed vineyards. And here is somebody who's actually doing the same, who's find a really cool place to put the wine and to express that. So there's one Chardonnay which shows that maybe it's a good choice, and is a point of difference for other whites around. So now I think it's really important, and we're now going to come to Valdetabe, which, if you can remember, it was one of the three subzones between Tierra Estella and Baja Montaña at the top of the inverted triangle pyramid. And this is a really remarkable estate. And so we've got lots to talk about here, because clearly it's a Navarra rosé, and it's a really classic Navarra rosé. The color is so distinctive. I'm so kind of dressed to match the color. You know you've got it here, and you know you've got garnacha. This is a wine that absolutely celebrates its garnachaness. And I remember I've been to this estate a couple of times, and it has been transforming. It's a huge estate, and it's been through various ownerships, and really from as I say on the slide, from 2001, it's really relaunched itself, and it has these lovely old buildings. And a very significant thing, I've got a picture of the chapel here because there's some mosaics inside about the story, but the Lord of Sarriere at a particular time was the brother of St. Francis Xavier. We have a St. Francis Xavier school quite close to us. And he, of course, was the founder of the Jesuits. And there's this lovely story of this dissolute young man who then goes on to become a saint. So that the estate has a lot of real depth around it. We're looking, aren't we, all of us, looking for stories around wines. And this is a winery that has a story. And it's, well, this is they have 2 rosés, and this is their kind of upper rosé. I'm glad to be able to share it with you. So it explodes with flavor. It's something also I'd love to have with chorizo or something like that. So then the question is, how can we assist Signoria de Sarriere to sell this wine in export when the marketplace is flooded with Provence rosés? I'd be curious to have your views on this later, that we could talk about it. It's, I remember that Chile used to make really wonderfully deep Syrah rosés, and they've gradually, carefully been readjusted into something else. But we have here, the denomination regulation is that you will have this kind of rosé. And I went with actually a couple of people who I know are on this presentation today. We went to a tasting at the Consejo of rosés. We were very lucky. We were able to sit at the back while winemakers went through their regular tasting of new vintage rosés. And clearly my scores coming from this very commercial London marketplace with its cluttered with its pale Provençal rosés weren't in line with what was happening with the rest of my other judges. It's a debate, but it's very clear this is the kind of colour and joyfulness that you can get, and I love the packaging. I've got a question about the pricing, which I will hope that, I know that Charlotte's listening and she may be able to find an answer, but where I haven't put a price, it's because I haven't necessarily been able to find a UK distributor. So that will show as we go through. So this is Baldisabe, and then just to tell you about Baldisabe, it's, as I said, the one in the centre, quite close to Pamplona, and right on the route of St James, and it's smaller in area, and it has a greater mix of grape varieties. You can see I've listed here what they are, red and white. And I've just had a message from Charlotte Rosemary, forgive me, Rose, which is £7 to £10 approximately. And Richard, a very interesting comment. We need a dark rosé campaign. I think, we get into fashion. So whatever it is that we're eating or drinking or reading or wearing, so we somehow think that we need to do it that way because everybody does. So maybe this is a social media campaign starting here. So yeah, some rocky stones, and it's interesting. It is the most humid, but you get absolutely, Charles. I hope everybody's watching the Q&A box. Start with the gay community. Yeah, absolutely. It's and this, because of its depth. The great thing about this wine is that it has loads of flavour and can be drunk throughout the year. Now, time is passing, and I must take you on to Nequeas. So this is the first of our reds, and it's another iconic Garnacha wine in a sense. Nequeas have recuperated some old fine garnachas. Many of them had disappeared. This was a story across this region, and one of the people who recuperated them. And it's a beautifully packaged. I mean, it's one of those wines that absolutely fits in with a new generation of. It makes a declaration about being a garnacha, and it's also made. One of the members of the team is this terrific lady, Concha Bethino. Anybody, I'm sure a number of you will have been to Nicaeas and met her, and she absolutely is an icon in terms of marketing Nicaeas and garnacha. Now it's a rich style, plump, and plenty of oak. It's something. I opened this probably only a few minutes before the tasting, and it's young and deep and dark. So I would definitely encourage you to come back to this after we finish the tasting. I think that's going to be the case with a number of these wines. So Nicaeas is a really. I'm delighted that it's part of this tasting, and we're going to move on now to Ribera Alta, to a wine which. Mimau, I think is how it's pronounced, which is called the Benjamin of the winery, the little one, the little favourite, the treasured child of the winery. And I hope that the winery won't object to the fact that I've chosen, I mean, Inurieta is a very established and well-known name, but in terms of looking for pictures, they were one of the few that did have some historic pictures, because a number of these wineries actually do date back quite a long way, but don't have too many photographs of that. So this, which isn't so long ago, does show people harvesting bush vines into the buckets. So we have it here, it's the second of the red wines. I hope you've numbered all your bottles or something so we don't get entirely confused. And this is a sign of how, in a warm place, garnacha can be, because it is 15% alcohol. There's no way of avoiding that. But actually, here am I saying, as so many of us always do, actually, it doesn't intrude, and they've balanced the use of the oak pretty well. There is oak. It would be lovely to taste this wine, actually both those wines, without the oak, but it certainly is, it's not too dominant by any means. And I'd like to, thinking about stockists, I'd like to point out we've got a wine here from Ultra Comida, who have, if you live in that area, well, actually they mail nationally, but Ultra Comida have launched in deepest Wales a terrific wine warehouse, and have an immensely good stock of all kinds of Spanish wines. So here's a little shout out for Ribera Alta. And we've got a note from Patricia. Patricia, you do like to see a little bit of pink. It's when you get a wine which shows zero pink. Exactly. It's like, doesn't really want to pretend it's pink, it's coming out white. Exactly. We could have a whole session on it, maybe. Liz Gabay is the person to do that. So Ribera Alta. So Ribera Alta is the largest, I think, 3,700 hectares. It is the largest one of those and central of the triangle which you saw. The main town is Tafalla, but in many ways, I feel it's, for me, the center of Ribera Alta is Olite, the castle of Olite, the history of Olite. And in fact, the Ochoas, who I visited first, were in Olite. So for somehow or other, for me, Olite is written on my heart. And it's interesting that here they have Graciano, that you might have thought that it was, perhaps an intruder from Rioja, but it's very established here. And there are some, there are a few single varietal Gracianos from Navarra, some from different places, but I found some really satisfying expressions of it, not perhaps as hard to love as some of the not so good pure Gracianos in Rioja. I mean, Rioja has some wonderful pure Grecianos, but they aren't all at that level. And there is Moscatel, and obviously, I'm sure quite a few of you will have walked those vineyards of Moscatel with the Ochoas. Here I mention them again. There are other producers, and Moscatel on a day like this, chilled, it's not overly sweet, it's just nicely sweet, would be a well, either we all afterwards go off and sit in the garden and have a glass of chilled Moscatel, or you have a little something to eat with it. But that's another little niche which deserves recuperation. I know there's quite a bit of organic wine growing on in this area, as there is across. It's a good place to do it, because as you can see from the climate note, it's in transition between dry and semi-arid. And when they say semi-arid, they mean semi-arid if we're moving into some really strikingly dry areas. So that was Ribera Alta. And now we're going to Baja Montaña, which of the three zones which run across the top of the triangle, you can call it that, the most easterly one is Unsi. Well, is Baja Montaña, and we have an example here from Unsi. Now I've got it. Unsi has a terrific label. Let me find my Unsi, and it's. I've got the notes for it here. Again, another expression, garnacha, and these two shots were ones that I found on my phone from a visit to Baja Montaña. So somebody else's vineyards, but you can see, the color of the soil, the ancient, that was just pre-pruning, the old bush vine in the front, very wiry and gnarled and silver. The wood is very silver. And then the same people had chosen also to prune the upper vineyard in a more organized way, but again, old and gnarled. And what was striking about that was that it was just one vineyard tucked into, as you can see, a hillside around. There are pockets of vineyards. It's not by any means an overall stretching countryside of vineyards, lots of small producers. This has lovely juiciness. And again, the oak seems to me, it's milder and something I find more approachable, but it's a really succulent garnacha, isn't it? You can hear in my mouth, it's how juicy it is. So this is Baja Montaña, on the border from one proud region of Navarra with another, Aragon. And basically, yes, this is basically red wine and basically garnacha, and with Tempranillo. And here in this region, we have seen a number of small producers and some co-ops getting a lot of attention for really good garnacha. So it's been one of the places that has driven the reputation of, or relaunched garnacha in Navarra. It's not the only place by any means, but if the last line you can see is San Martin de Unx, and it's a quite memorable name, Unx, not one you forget easily, and that is something that has become a town that's become linked with garnacha. So we have here, we're now going to mix up a little bit. We're in Ribera Alta, and now we're moving from gently, this is a very carefully chosen selection, gently from garnacha only to garnacha Tempranillo blend. So this is beginning to go in a different style and in quite a bit more oak. And it wants to be a proud representation of a quite the castle and history. And interestingly, they say they're the first winery in Navarra to make Rosado in the 1950s. Now, I have copied this down because I've got it on the website, so it must be true, but it may be a mistranslation. But actually, I haven't looked into the history of this, so I can't say. But it's very possible. Charles, your comment on the previous wine, yes, absolutely I agree. In each, we're going to look a little bit at export, but different producers, different markets, different interpretations of the variety. And from that Ribera Alta, we're going now to actually a brand that's pretty well known in the UK, Principe de Viana, which is a group which also contains Rioja Vega, I think Albert Cunha. So a number of you, I'm sure, will have will know this brand, or indeed the other companies related to it. They're quite often in touch, and they are very good at taking an international approach to their wines. And so what we have here is now we're moving with these last four into really a visitor's blend, Tempranillo, the classic, the local blend with Merlot and Cabernet. So it'll be interesting now to see how these next four develop. And they make a great deal of their investment in research and development. They're very forward-looking company. And there are some small Garnacha. I can think of one small Garnacha producer who used to work here and has now gone off to make their own very special Garnacha with old vines in elsewhere in Navarra. So places like this are often kind of seeding grounds for people who will then go off and do their own thing. So I think one of the questions is, when the decision was made, and understandably it was made to bring in Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, because at that time, we're talking about the second half of the 20th century, they were wanting to establish themselves as here in Navarra as something different, but also reflecting the international demand, which was substantial for Cabernet Sauvignons and Merlots. And actually, I think if you're going to do it, this is a very polished effort. Up to you to see what you think. But Lauren's comment about the price is incredible. Tim, it's quite possible that I was sent. Let's have a look at the text sheets now. I've taken data from the website, and Charlotte also took data from the website. This has been a kind of team effort. Let's see if I printed off that one. Mine said exactly Tempranillo, Syrah, and Garnacha. But when I went to a Spanish website, it said Merlot, Tempranillo, Cabernet Sauvignon. So maybe there's one for the English and one for the Spanish. So yes, I have exactly the same one I printed off from Charlotte, but when I was researching it yesterday, the one I found on the Spanish website was different. So one will be more up to date than the other. What we clearly have is a little confusion there, but thank you for that question. So that's Principe de Viana. Now, I have mentioned the Ochoas before, I think just simply because they're very rooted in Navarra and in their region. And it's an interesting business of a family that is managing to move on to the second generation. It's a major problem when you have somebody who is so well known as Javier, who is a long-standing member of the Gran Orden de Caballeros de Vino, and he's, as indeed, Tim and Charles with us. I think that's all on today. So you have somebody who's so influential, so well known. How do you enable the daughters to then begin to take their own place? But as you can see, they are a very united family, and is a very far-sighted father. He's now quite recently become a grandfather, and I think that's been part of it. And he's, it's very interesting. You should spend some time on the website, because they have now segmented the family business so that there are the classic wines, which are the Javier Ochoa style wines. There are the ones that the next generation are making, including a very lovely sparkling Moscatel, which is a bit like it's a kind of Asti type wine. It was great. It was great with a Zork stopper, which is a very fun drink, but I'm not sure that we get it in the UK market. And so they're making different styles. So this one, Corazon Finca Montijo, is something that has come out regularly, really well in blind tastings I've been involved in the UK, and it's entirely nailed its self to the mast of the international varieties, but it does it really well. So let me find the wine somewhere here. This one, yeah. If you're going to have, and I think this is a very intelligently generous blend. I think the Merlot rather than the Cabernet, if you're going to have this, I think it's really subtly and juicily handled. And quite recently, Ochoa had joined Amathos, who'd taken all their, I think we've got more or less the whole range. So it's worth having a look through that. So let me see if I can go to the next one. Let me make sure that you see, that's it. Good. And I should just show the picture here. San Fermin, they are very, very definite annual visitors to the San Fermin Festival. And, you can see they have their own printed scarves to wear. So now we're going to move on to a Vino de Pago. And it's Otazu, so which is really, as you can see, a beautiful, beautiful site, and a very striking one also. And this is, they like to have some of the local varieties, so that's giving you the Tempranillo, and then at the same time, it's brought in a blend of the internationals. These people, to qualify as a Pago, obviously needed to do a huge amount of work on analysing the soil types, on justifying exactly what they were doing, having a history of the quality of their wines. And Vinos de Pago is a whole different presentation, isn't it? And there's an argument about them, but undoubtedly, if you want to make a name for yourself in your place, then Vino de Pago has been one of the ways to do it. And you can see that people like Mustiguillo, for instance, in Utiel Requena, wanted to make a separate name for themselves, and yes, you can do it. So Otazu certainly has the same capabilities. And they've had the Pago since 2009. Very rich, intensely juicy wine. It would be good to taste this with quite a bit more age on it. I mean, it's perfect for an audience that wants a juicily marketed, juicily made wine for drinking now. But actually, I'd love just to see it with a bit more age. And possibly, I know for this category of wine, premium cuvee, you need to have 12 months in oak, but I don't know, I can maybe have a little bit, they don't say what the oak is, but maybe a little bit more of the 1 year or 2 year oak, just to smooth it down a little, but they've certainly got a huge amount of concentration there. And then we come to our last wine, which is Pago de Larraenza. And this is a historic estate. You can see from the picture, really lovely, lovely historic estate. But they relaunched it. The family came in and relaunched it in 2001. So it's, in a sense, it's only really coming into itself now. You can see what was happening in Navarra around the 2000s, the beginning of the revival of the place, of new approaches to the way of doing it. And this is something that again, hasn't abandoned Tempranillo completely. In fact, I think, you know, the wine that we have that is without Tempranillo is the one from Ochoa, who's definitely got a Merlot Cabernet there, whereas this one again has some Tempranillo in it, and they use a very well-known independent consultant to give them the detail, which I think is why they're a little bit more specific about vinifying each variety separately and thinking a little bit more about the use of oak. And interesting, they've used the word single vineyard, which obviously has become such a battleground over the way in Rioja. And these wines have been, the red wines, ordered in vintage, and 2014 seems to me it's an absolutely lovely point. It can certainly go on, but interesting, they really seem to be getting a full understanding of what their vineyard is about and what their expression can be. Yes, it's a big wine again, but it wants to be. And you know, my question to you, I guess, is going to be how you feel Tempranillo fits within that classical blend. You know, if we were in South Africa, we might be talking about Cabernet Merlot Pinotage. Here we're talking about Cabernet Merlot Tempranillo, and how happily they blend together. So Ribera Baja is the one subzone, it's the one at the tip which we should finish on. We don't have a wine from there today, but there are plenty around. And Tudela is the place I showed you at the beginning, which has these, it's one of the many old towns with wonderful history. And it has terrific vegetables and fruit and so on, but it's really, really a delicious place to go and eat, with the Sierra del Moncayo very close. And Tempranillo and Garnacha, this is an area where they very strongly have their local varieties. And this is, it's much more wedded to the tradition than the others, perhaps. And it has a number of interesting producers who are definitely well worth a follow. So just to sum up, because I think this also shows something about the wine styles, about who's buying their wines and want them. In 2020, the biggest exports were to Germany, which I think is very interesting choice, and then China. That may change, we'll see, and then the UK. Whereas the USA actually was very small in comparison. Now, of course, we have to think about campaigns, who was running where those campaigns were being run, and indeed in 2020, COVID was affecting all of those. But that's an interesting proportion of sales. And then the fact that at the moment export is only is 1/3. So historically, I feel I've seen much more Navarra in the market than perhaps I've seen now. But obviously, with this new campaign starting in the UK, that should be changing. And here to finish, and thank you for your attention, is an example of bull running. Now, and I guess the striking thing about this picture is that there are so many people close together not wearing masks, which shows how our world has changed. But of course, this is the fresh air. And there's one other I wasn't able to find, because this happens early in the morning, any wine in this picture. But what I was struck by was the man on the left-hand side, who's the photographer, who's also wearing his San Fermin colours. So although he is a photographer, he's made sure that he blends into the background. So thank you very much. That's the end of my formal presentation. I'm very happy now to go back over wines with you to start some questions and thoughts about local varieties versus Merlot and Cabernet and Chardonnay. Though, of course, in fact, given all this time, Merlot and Cabernet and Chardonnay are established. And it's not that they're so new. They're finding their places, and in the right places. They're working really well. So I'm over to you for any questions that you'd like to ask, and we can take it from there. Could we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Ava, I'm sure we can. I think it's all finished and tidy here. So I'm sure we can. In fact, it looks like there will be an answer coming to you in a second. Any other comments about how you feel about international grape varieties versus comment from Charles about Chivite. Chivite used to be a really important producer. Have they faded? No, they're still around. I mean, I think, as you know, they've joined Castillo Parellada, and so that they're still certainly around. But I think, one has to look at the strategy of that business, perhaps. But I think, we learnt to love rosé, didn't we? Rosados with the Chivite 125, that's so. Yep, no, Charles says still around. Rose, yes, the Unsi Garnacha is getting a lot of votes. Any other favourites? I'm curious to know. Just if we'd had a regular chat box, we'd have had a bit more. Liz has raised a hand. Liz, do you want to say something? You have to unmute yourself, or maybe I can.
Sorry about that. I didn't intend to, but I think it was absolutely fascinating, especially the variety of the Garnachas. But do you have any idea the proportion, the way people are going? Are there more blends, including international varieties, or are they going back to Garnacha? Any thoughts?
Well, I don't have the marketing figures, and what I would say is that. A lot of this comes down to personalities, doesn't it? We've just mentioned, Charles has just mentioned Chivite as one of those. There are small producers in Garnacha who've actually internationally made a lot of name for themselves, for their vineyards. There are Javier Ochoa, again, was very significant at the beginning, and his children are taking over. But it feels to me that because there is such a drive behind Garnacha in other parts of Spain, not so far away, then actually that has also driven an enthusiasm for Garnacha here. And I have to say, I remember doing a blind tasting at Decanter a few years back, 4 or 5 years back, and there were it was an absolute discovery of a number of producers in Navarra who I hadn't heard of, who were producing exceptionally good Garnacha. It's been a kind of secret. So hopefully for some consumers aren't Garnacha drinkers, though I think the style of Garnacha here is very, very enjoyable, and maybe a warmer and generous than it's certainly more warmer and more generous than some of the ones from, let's say, Gredos, which have a more deliciously attenuated style. That so I think that the potential is producing very satisfactory wines, but undoubtedly there are two markets, and there will be people who would like a very, very excellent Merlot Cabernet, and they'll get that from Navarra too. So Navarra has a sort of quadruple message to give. It's got to talk about rosés and dark rosés if it's going to continue with those and not allow people and encourage them. It's got to continue to talk about Garnacha, because that's really caught imagination of a new generation, and it has to continue to say, if you want a classic Chardonnay in Spain, this is the place to come. Or if you want to have a good traditional blend of Cabernet Merlot, then this is also the place to come. Lauren, you've just ordered some Nortathi. That's very good. Jenny, great. Thank you for giving Tim the statistics, 600 to 700 meters above sea level. And Jenny, I think you see the response to the wines. So that's very good. Let me see. Thank you. Charlotte is gobbling up these comments, and Lauren the Mimau too. And Inurieta are a super interesting business. I've enjoyed wines of theirs over the years, but this Mimau for me was new this time. Yes, Rose. I mean, I think there's a place for both native and international. Yes, I would rather they focus on Grenache and Tempranillo. It's certainly a complicated one. I think if you're a business, that's why I think it's quite fascinating. I keep going back to them just because they were there at the beginning and they're still there. To a business like Ochoa, and there are others, if you really nailed your mask to Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and had great success with it at the beginning, then you need to find a way through to reflect changing public tastes and desires. And I think they are doing it, but they're you have to communicate on so many different dimensions. So, for instance, if you go to Vinobile, you'll see the Ochoas there because they have a Moscatel, so they go to the sweet wine fair, fortified wine fair down here, but at the same time, they need to be communicating about Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon elsewhere. So thank you, Keith. Yeah, very, very good question, Keith. Some merchants continue to market Navarra as Rioja's neighbor. Is there work to be done to cement the sense of place that is Navarra? Yes, and my goodness, the place. Now I put in some rather light-hearted pictures, and it's not all San Fermin and delicious cakes. There is history in spades and extraordinary countryside, really beautiful countryside. And again, I can't stop talking about the vegetables if you're there in the right season. So I think that the identity of Navarra is different. I think it's something, and I also feel slightly that this picture here, even that we wouldn't have this picture here in Logroño in quite the same way. I mean, I know there's the festival in Logroño where they cover themselves in wine, but I think what Navarra can do, obviously, as Tim was saying, we all need to be back there, just walking the streets and breathing the air. But what Navarra needs to think about doing is putting it's communicating the speciality of the place. Rioja it doesn't want to be that place next to Rioja. Ultra Comida, yes, Stephen, strong recommendation for Ultra Comida. And Ava, yes, the Battaglia di Vino. So, if the Riojanos want to throw away all their wine or their banned wine, they're welcome to do so. And this is, in a way, even more risky business, doing the bull running. But I think that was a very good point, Keith, about, and it's something we as communicators need to think about what are the simple messages about Navarra as a place and its wines that make it different. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah Jane. I think it's a good point to end because we have reached our 1 hour limit. But I'm sure there will be a lot more thought and discussion about this. I found it fascinating, particularly the variety of the Garnachos and also some of the top blends. I liked the blends with the Tempranillo in them. So really a fascinating area to learn more about. I hope everyone will go onto the Dio Navarra site to find out more and go through the PowerPoints for more detail or watch the recording again. So a very big thank you to Sarah Jane and to Dio Navarra for providing the wines and setting this up, and to Charlotte Hay for the background work. So thank you all very, very much. And we hope to see you at the next Circle events. Thank you.